Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds for the attendees to arrive. I can see the numbers coming up a bit here. Hello, everyone who's joined since I last said hello. I'm Amy, Service Delivery Director at AbilityNet, and I'm going to be your host today. So we're joined today by Louise from Sign Solutions, who's our BSL translator, and Kate from My Clear Text on captions. You can switch on live captions via the control panel using the CC button. And we've also got captions available on stream text. You can access those by going to www.streamtext.net/player?event=AbilityNet. And our slides are available if you want to follow along with those at www.slideshare.net/AbilityNet. You'll be able to access notes, transcript, and a recording at www.abilitynet.org.uk/DDM2. And during the session, if you could use the Q&A window to ask any questions that you have. And we're also going to be using Slido, which is available at slido.com, and the ID we are going to be using for today's meeting is 632780. We'll talk a little bit more about Slido in a minute. Lastly, we will be presenting you with a feedback form at the end of the webinar. Please do use that to give us any feedback on the session and also to add any questions that we didn't get around to answering during the session. So I'll start the introductions with a little bit about AbilityNet for anybody who's never come across us before. We're a technology charity that exists to remove barriers to participation for disabled people at work, in education, and in day-to-day life. And we do this by providing services to individuals, providing recommendations for assistive technology and adaptations to meet their needs. And we also offer a wide range of consultancy and training services to organisations, all geared towards offering an inclusive employee and customer experience. So on to some information about today's webinar. Next slide, please. So today we're going to be focusing on the positive impact of engaging with and listening to colleagues with lived experience of disability when you're developing welcoming and productive workplace practices and culture. And the webinar format today is going to be a panel discussion with colleagues at AbilityNet, and we're going to be running through some questions that often crop up when we're looking at evolving and growing disability positive cultures and practices. Right, so without further ado, let's meet the panel. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Addy, Gizzy and Adam. So would you like to introduce yourselves? Let's start with Addy.
Thank you, Amy, and hello everyone. I'm Addy Latif, and I'm an accessibility consultant here at AbilityNet. Well, where shall I start? I'm from Scotland originally, but I've lived in England long enough, so my Glaswegian accent has been very softened, so you should just about be able to understand me. I have lived experience of having a disability. I am blind and I lost my sight roughly at the age of 9, or that's when I started going, 8 or 9, I can't remember exactly. Yeah, what more would you like me to say, Amy? Is that enough, or shall I
Yeah,
continue?
absolutely. I'm
Is
sure
that
we'll.
too much?
No.
Is that fine? Okay, lovely.
Thanks, Adi. That's brilliant. Gizzy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gizzy. I'm a learning technologist at the University of West of England, and I also do some accessibility consulting for AbilityNet. I'm deaf, small d, hearing impaired, hard of hearing, with audio processing disorder as a feature of neurodivergence. I'm originally from the Netherlands and don't have an accent either. And that's me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gizzy. And Adam.
Hi there, I'm Adam Tweed. I'm the innovation consultant at AbilityNet. I have lived experience, recent diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, and a kind of history around bipolar, and a background in psychology as well. So I'm kind of talking from a lived experience mental health angle here.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks everybody. So moving on to the next slide, and just to talk a little bit about the session. So it's an opportunity today that we want to hear from the panel about their views and experiences, but it's also an open discussion with everybody on the webinar. So please do feel free to ask any questions and add any thoughts that you have as we go through. And we just like to pause and ask everyone to please respect everyone's right to ask questions and you know, share their thoughts without judgment. We do find that people tend to get really anxious about saying the wrong thing or causing offence, and that can actually be counterproductive and avoid people talking about the things that are really important. So we just wanted to make it clear that it's a safe environment to ask or discuss anything. And that being said, although we have the Q&A available for any questions, we've also got an instance of Slido running. So if you want to ask something but you'd prefer to do that anonymously, you can use that. And there's a quick reminder on this slide of the Slido code. So if you go to slido.com and enter 632780, you can raise questions that way, or you can scan the QR code with your phone. And Adam's going to be monitoring the Slido chat, so he'll be chiming in with questions and comments as we go. Next slide, please. So we wanted to start off with something that is so crucial to culture and can also be a point at which awkwardness tends to start for lots of people, which is around language. And I just wanted to ask the panel, are there any language do's and don'ts, or perhaps just observations about the impact of language that you might have to share? Adi, shall we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Amy. Yeah, language is an interesting one, and a lot of the times I see people, you know, feel they walk on eggshells when it comes to language, or get themselves in a pickle, or feel they get themselves in a pickle. For me, I've been told I'm pretty nonchalant in someone's words about language. As a person who has lived experience of being blind, and obviously I can't speak for everyone else who has a visual impairment, but for me, I think if people come from a good place and someone isn't being abusive to me, then I'm pretty flexible with, you know, how they might refer to me. And if I'm not comfortable with it, then, you know, I will let them know what I'm comfortable with. So for me, usually when someone's, you know, making reference to the fact that I can't see, you know, I'll say, you know, I'll refer to myself as being visually impaired, or I'll refer to myself as being blind. It's not really a hidden disability I have. I use a white stick, so I can't really hide that fact. And so sometimes I'll just say I'm blind. It's easier for me because I have some sight. Yeah. And most people who can't see have some level of sight, but sometimes I'll just say I'm blind because I'm registered as blind. And if I don't have time for a conversation about my visual impairment, because if I say I'm visually impaired, people might go into, how much can you see? Can you see me? It goes into this long conversation, and if I'm just trying to get onto the next bus, and you know, I don't have time for that. So I'm comfortable with saying I'm blind or I'm visually impaired. And I phoned around a couple of my friends this morning who are visually impaired, and quite a lot of us are very comfortable with that. When it goes into the area of, you know, when people try to get too creative with it, they might say, are you visually challenged or visually disturbed? I even got once. That's when it gets a bit awkward. And you know what? I don't hold it against anyone. You know, you have to learn. People just don't know how to say it. So I mean, I usually in a conversation will say I'm blind or visually impaired. There's certain things that do make me feel a bit awkward or a bit uncomfortable in language. So sometimes people refer to things like differently abled, and you know, that for me, that makes me feel awkward, because I don't like the word different there in that sense. You know, I'm always trying to normalize, you know, my visual impairment. I just want to connect with other people, and sometimes when you chuck in things like differently abled, then it's, for me, that makes me feel uncomfortable. There's other moments where people might say, you know, we're chatting and someone's sighted, so that's what I refer to you people who can see. I say sighted. Hope that's okay. Yeah. And so someone sighted to me might say, oh, did you see that on Netflix last night? And then there'll be this like little pause, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean see, I meant hear. And that's awkward, because I come from being able to see. My family members can, you know, some of them can see, my friends see. So I use the same language as everyone else, so that's not a problem for me. The problem is when people try and backtrack, and then it's awkward. Then you're pointing out, you know, the fact that I'm different potentially. So I don't like that. And the one other bit I feel a bit uncomfortable is when people use things like, you know, don't be blind to that. You know, when they're obviously trying to, you know, use the word blind instead of ignorant. You know, so I think that connotation isn't good, because you know, I'm blind, but I'm not ignorant, or you know, so you know, I can. So it's very important to try and change. I mean, I can be ignorant, but generally there's other blind people who are smarter than me, and they're not. So you know, using that term blind for being someone being ignorant or annoying or obnoxious or whatever, I think that's I don't like that. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts on it. And generally, I think the final point for me is, you know, people can call me a pineapple if they want. You know, sometimes it's like the least of my problems. The fact that I face barriers accessing information and digital services and just physical services, that's my major problem. You know, if you can give me access to them, then you can call me whatever you like.
Thanks.
I was going to say, and can we just note that I resisted saying anything to you being ignorant?
Yeah, you held back. No, I think it's really important. These sort of and a lot of the time they are colloquialisms or sayings that apply a disability related term to something that's negative. And I think in the mental health arena, that's a big thing as well, that is in everyone's lexicon, is to just throw out these kind of mental health related terms, which are not always helpful, are they? Adam, I don't know if you want to come in on that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's something that I'm kind of acutely aware of, but we do have expressions like don't have to be mad here, but it helps, and all that sort of thing. And I think there is a kind of risk that we almost normalize the stigma of it. It's that, you know, it's not necessarily the person you're talking to. It could be the person that you are talking to and it's overheard by somebody else, but it also, it kind of makes it an unsafe environment for people to discuss that sort of thing in. And I think that's the key thing. I remember quite early on in my days with AbilityNet, I was at an event and I was on that kind of heightened walking on eggshells around language, and I referred to myself as manic depressive. And somebody came up to me and said, you can't say that, it's bipolar. And I apologized. And then they walked away. And I thought, well, hang on a second, that's me. I'm talking about myself. And it was that I was so kind of tightly wound about the fact that I could say the wrong thing, that I was apologizing to somebody who didn't have lived experience, had nothing like that. But I was bound to be in the wrong because I'm talking in this sphere and it's not a safe space. So
Yeah, it can get a bit the other way, can't it? And people treading on eggshells, correcting each other, being oversensitive on other people's behalves as well. I don't know, Gizzy, if you've got anything you want to come in on this topic.
Well, it's a big problem for us in education, because there's lots of language use around different things that impact us. And for my personal experience, I can't speak for all deaf people or all neurodivergent people, but there, to me, doesn't seem to be a single option for all, other than a general rule of politely asking people about their personal preference. So when you're referring to them, to their identity, to their disability, to their group identity, because there are differences even within deaf, hard of hearing communities, never mind the wider disabled communities. It's similar within neurodivergent communities as well, and people's preferences are very different and very personal. But similar to Addy and Adam, I don't care what you call me, just call me Gizzy. Just recognize that I'm not going to hear you, and I might annoy you because I don't hear you, and then I might answer 5 minutes later. That's fine. It's not a problem.
I think that's it, that communication and ask, because also language is constantly evolving, isn't it? You know, so it's no good saying, oh, I know what you're meant to say because I spoke to one person about it in 2001, so job done. And it really is just about, a sense of awareness, I suppose, and respect, I think, was a really important point that you made there, Gizzo.
Yeah, and I think it's part of our drive as humans when we're communicating to have shorthand for everything. And disabled community do it as well. Deaf, capital D, call people who can hear hearies. It's not insulting. It's just a different way of identifying a different group of people with different abilities. So it's not unique to the population as a whole. We all do it to some degree. So it's just.
There's a couple of points people have made in the chat as well. So we've got we consult with people with lived experience of disability, and it can be tricky to get terms everyone is happy with. There seems to be no one set of terms. Sorry, I realized I was gabbling then, and we have a BSL interpreter, so I'll try and slow it down. And there was another one that I wanted to bring up. And where do you think, so this is the question, where do you think this attitude or view that the word disabled is dirty, wrong, or shouldn't be used, particularly by able-bodied people? And I would also say on that one, we would typically not use able-bodied in that context. We would use non-disabled, just to kind of highlight there. We're talking language, so again. So yeah, throwing it out to the panel.
2 questions. So which one should we do first? About maybe that sense of negativity around disability
disabled
as a term.
Dirty, wrong, shouldn't be used. Yeah.
Well, I think there's quite a drive in parts of the disabled community to take back ownership of the term disabled as an identity, and that you constantly got this cycle going on because we're social creatures and we like to identify in groups and share a shared experience and all of that sort of thing. So there will always be times when you're right, and there'll always be times when you're wrong, whichever term that you use, because it will change and even evolve as it always does, because that's what we do.
I think for me, and this comes also to that question about, do you put the person first or the disability, a person with disability or a disabled person? For me, when I think of the word disabled, for me, it's not a badge of honor. I'm not going around saying, oh yes, I'm disabled and I'm proud of it. For me, I think community is important. So, it took me a while to identify myself with other people that were blind, because I didn't, had a long time before I accepted the fact that I was blind and I had a disability. I didn't want to go there. But now for me, when I say I'm disabled, I'm actually, it's more of a description. I'm disabled because I can't use a certain app because it's not accessible with my screen reader. I'm disabled from going to a certain venue because they're not comfortable with someone who's blind coming to their venue. So when I say I'm disabled, I'm disabled. One day I might not be disabled. If we all get onto the EasyJet app and try and book a flight, you know, you using your eyes, me using my screen reader, I'm not disabled. You know, I did an online exam with my fellow colleagues who aren't blind, and I completed it quick as anyone else in that room. I wasn't disabled. I'm visually impaired. My eyes don't work that well. But for me, the word disabled is when something has been done. When I'm facing a barrier, I'm disabled. That way. I know this is probably quite a narrow kind of perception of it, and I understand the great work that's been done in the disabled community and all the activism, and you know, we're very fortunate where we are now compared to the past. But I really see myself as disabled when I'm not able to do something.
Yeah, and that reframing is so important, isn't it? To you know, to focus on the barriers rather than. Definitely. Right, so my slide master has moved on to the next slide, so we're definitely we're definitely being reminded to keep moving. Thank you. So this is an interesting question around when you take a one-size-fits-all approach to working and how that can be problematic. So again, I think that touches on what you were just saying, Addy, about maybe a lack of awareness around the barriers of taking a really narrow, standardised approach to working. Gizzy, did you have an example around this?
Yeah, so I've worked at UE for quite a long time now. Longest I've ever worked anyway, and I have a current and very long-running tech issue that I've been supporting a range of different staff and students with recently, and it's like that we provide institution-wide laptop and keyboard setups that are standardized, so everyone gets exactly the same. But people aren't exactly the same. UE's a huge employer and a huge organization. We have a lot of very diverse staff and roles, and the type of work that you need to carry out requires different tech as well, and that isn't considered in the standardization of technologies that we are provided to work on, and it causes really big issues for many, severely impacts working effectively, causes stress, for some of us physical damage, things like carpal tunnel and RSI, that kind of thing, and of course negatively impacts people's progression and promotion potential as a result of this. And we need to remember that is part of the problem with making working equitable for everybody. And it you know, the strategies that we have to address those needs and those differences in the way that people address them, access to work, occupational health, we have WESL and all of that sort of stuff, they're great, but they take a very long time to be assessed. They take a very long time to be implemented. A person can be working a year at least before they get sorted out, and in that time can acquire injuries or further exacerbation of existing disabilities or health conditions. So it would be better if we could address that by people being able to use their own devices, but we have problems with legislation around GDPR rights, all of that kind of thing. That makes it very difficult. So there's a constant balancing act.
There's so much
I'm aware that
it's
very difficult to address that, because how do you provide that?
Yeah, and sometimes this desire to simplify things actually creates much more complexity at an individual level, and what you've just explained, Gizzy, around the, you know, the fallout from an implementation of a policy like that. So I think that co-design and engaging people in design, you know, if a change like that's being made, that consultation is absolutely key. Adam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just thought to bring in the Slido again. So we've had a question or a request for advice here on how to deal with cost-focused pushback from HR and security concerns from IT when this person has requested to have specialized software installed to make their job easier. They've said they're requesting industry-leading software, not untested, unsafe applications, also recommended by occupational health and access to work.
is that hand in hand working, isn't it? A lot of the time is if you've got the IT team who are not aligned with occupational health, for instance, is always going to cause issues. I don't know, Adam, you might have some thoughts on this, because you advise a lot of our customer base around these kinds of things, and some of it's mindset, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of inbuilt solutions that are either not promoted or not known about enough. I think Microsoft, for example, is brilliant at producing accessible technology, but awful at telling people it's there. And I think there are always going to be tensions between IT security. So, for example, certain programs will show up as security risks because of the way they work. And I do think there is an inherent tension, and it's going to be there until you get people in the room and explain this is why it's needed. I'm not doing this because I just want to be special, or I want, I want something that's going to make my job easier. Actually, I want something, or I need something that is going to enable me to do my job. And that's that thing. And as Gizzy says as well, that ability to use your own devices, they are set up the way that you need them to work, the way that you understand they work, and in the way that they're going to enable you to work.
It's so unusual for someone to take time out of their working day to request things that they don't need. So as well, I think it's important to articulate that you should be coming from a position of trust and openness, rather than this kind of folded arms and you justify to me why you need this. And I think that's something that's really important from HR's perspective as well, to spend time with people, doing the day-to-day job and having that visibility of the impact it's having from a productivity, stress, physical health in some cases. So yeah, definitely. Right, okay, so sorry, go on.
As a follow-up for that one, there's another point that I thought might be good for Addy or Gizzy here, that I found that managers make far too many assumptions and adopt a "we know what's best to help with X's visual impairment" type position. What do you think about that? Have you ever had those situations where somebody said, "Oh, you're blind, so you need this"?
I know what you need.
Yeah, my bank's always trying to send me out Braille statements. I don't really read Braille. I mean, I think there is. Assumptions are always there, whether they're positive ones, or sometimes people think if you have a disability you're like a Paralympian or like a superhero, and then they go the other way. They think you have a disability and you can't do anything. I remember turning up once for an interview, and the person was in shock. Because I was blind, and the person, they said, if I had known you're blind, I wouldn't have let you get this far in this process. And shocking as that sounds, in hindsight, I don't feel malice towards this person, because this person genuinely didn't expect a blind person to be able to do that job. They had a certain perception of what it'd be like for them to be blind, and they wouldn't be able to do it. So I think there are a lot of assumptions there. But I mean, in my career, I have struggled to get the right tech from employers. There's been just weird things like, security tokens, those little hardware devices you used to have, and you used to generate a number. I can't see that. In one job, I said, can't we just get the electronic version of that on the apps, so it can generate the number? And they're like, no, we don't do that as our policy. We can't do that. The security considerations here, blah 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 blah. But people don't realize other people will be doing something similar in their organizations, and they're fine with the security. And I think if it's just left to everyone's just trying to do their job, and if you've got someone in IT, they're just trying to do their job, they've got a certain brief, they're fulfilling that brief, they don't want any extra additional challenges. And I think it definitely needs to come from high up. The leadership in the organization needs to commit to, we need to create an organization that provides the best conditions optimizes our employees. You know, it takes a lot of money to recruit someone. You can't just have them only 80% productive because you've given them the wrong tech. That's a big cost. That's more than the £500 you might have to pay to get them the right laptop or the upgrade the memory, you know, on their machine. So it just doesn't make sense. I mean, if you see people like plants, you know, we're all like little different plants in an organization. You can't give cactus the same treatment you give can't think of any other plant.
Fern. How about a fern?
Yeah, we're obviously not very good with plants. Not sure why I went down that analogy. But yeah, so I've been in organizations where I'm not being as productive and as useful as I can. And I've been having to get other staff members to help me with stuff, which makes me feel helpless, but also takes up their time just because I've not had the right equipment.
Yeah,
such a good point.
And yeah.
I love my current manager, I should say, Mark Walker. He's brilliant.
There we go. Brightly point. Great. Okay. No, I really agree with what you said as well, Addy, about how if leadership can set the general ethos to say we welcome and want to build an environment that supports everybody in the way that they need, that makes it so much easier when people are encountering barriers like the person who raised that question, where people are sort of saying, oh no, not possible, blah blah blah. Definitely. Okay, so we have another question around culture, and there might be some, I know there's questions coming in thick and fast in the chat box, so there might be some that relate to this around, you know, there's been quite a lot of research done around the benefits of diverse teams. So I don't know if any of the panel have got some comments on that, obviously from a business perspective, but also from a positive working environment.
Definitely.
I'm not, as the middle-aged Caucasian man, I'm not going to go first on this one.
All right then. I'll go first then.
Go on, Kizzy.
So speaking from my own experience, I don't work in business, so I work for a university, which is a totally different kind of institution. They have a culture all of their own. But for me, it's been feeling included and respected and ironically heard in an institution. It's the first workplace, I've worked in lots of different types of workplace before getting into education, where I've had that at any level. It's not perfect and it doesn't happen all the time, but it massively benefits your self-reliance, your confidence, your own listening skills, your autonomy and your independence. And that's really important for me because I do not work well in a micromanaged environment. and it improves my engagement with tasks and workflows and colleagues and teams generally. And I have noticed that in my own work and actually in my partner's work, that teams that are more diverse seem to be better at problem solving. They seem to be better at being creative, at cross communication, keeping everyone aware of what's going on. And so much of our working lives now is working and collaborating together to deal with something or create something or solve something. It's absolutely crucial. And the more diverse it is, the more likely what you produce will be more accessible to more people, will benefit more people, and come up with a solution that's more sustainable and more humane in the long term. So, and I think that just reduces the stress on all of us because we all take up each other's burdens. We contribute where we're strong and where we're not. We leave the gap for someone else to fill that and work together. It seems to be a more open and honest way of working. It benefits us all.
Brilliant stuff. We had another question that's on the next slide around, and this was from an employer asking, how much can I as an employer ask you about what you need to succeed? I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on how that works. I know within AbilityNet, a lot of the work that we do with organisations is very focused on looking at the working environment and removing barriers so that people aren't requiring as many adjustments. But how would the panel advise on this question?
I can jump in here, Amy.
Thanks, Ade.
My thoughts. So I was always of the impression that, people should just ask, if you're in an interview, employers should just ask, hey, Adi, how do you get things done? Recently, I've been corrected legally. That might not, you have to be careful legally. You can't say, oh, yeah, I see you're blind. So tell me about, what's it like being blind? And can you actually do the job? So that might not work as well. So a couple of bits of advice from me. I'd say as an employer, just become more curious, become educated in how people who are disabled with different needs, how they get their work done. So if someone doesn't have any use of their arms, how would they use a computer? Do all your research beforehand, try and be a little bit more open-minded and aware. If you look at someone's CV, one of the best experiences I had was person didn't care I was blind. I asked them, I said, oh, by the way, aren't you curious how I get stuff done? They're like, no. They're like, I can see, I've looked at your CV, you've done all these things, you worked for this company and that company, so clearly you've got a way of doing it. And so that was a great experience for me. So I think it's important to understand, obviously, to not to make a point about someone's disability. In my case, it's obvious, I'm blind, got a stick in my hand, there's a massive elephant in the room. So, people do know that. I can't hide that fact. I can't hide it, but I'd be bouncing off things and they'll just think I'm drunk then, which is worse. So what I do as a disabled person myself, what I do now is when I go to interviews, I do all the questions, answer all the competency-based questions. Disability doesn't come up in it. It shouldn't. There's no need for it to. And then at the end, I try and address that elephant in the room. I say, oh, by the way, as you can tell, I'm blind, and this is how I get my work done. I use something called a screen reader, and I sometimes even give them a demonstration of how that works. And so, as a sighted person, you might be using a mouse. If you're using a spreadsheet, for example, you'd be using your mouse, you've been looking with your eyes, what cell you want to go to, you might be clicking in that cell. As a blind person, I use a screen reader. I can install it on a Windows machine. It comes installed on a Mac machine, so you don't need to do anything extra. And I use the keyboard and everything is read aloud to me. I use headphones, so not everyone has to listen to it in the office. I can speed up the text. I can listen to it faster at times than someone who can see. So I try and put that person at ease, to let them know, educate them, because what happens is, okay, we might not be able to legally ask as an employer, you might not be able to ask me if I've not disclosed it, but if you leave that interview not knowing how I do my work and having your limited perceptions that, oh, a blind person won't be able to do this, then I'm not going to get the job. And that does happen a lot. So I'd rather bring up that issue. And my brother he's blind and he was trained as an accountant, and he went to lots and lots of interviews at the beginning and he would get rejected. And then one day he just asked one of the interviewers, he's like, okay, I understand you don't want to give me the job, that's fine, but please just tell me why I didn't get it. And the interviewer was very honest. They're like, we just can't see how a blind person would be able to do the job because they don't know, they're not blind and they've not had any experience. So it is really important, especially when you have a disability that's pretty obvious, as the candidate, you do maybe help to address that elephant in the room. Should you need to do that? Unfortunately, you shouldn't, because people should be aware. We should live in a world where people understand, how people can get stuff done. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're still not at that level of maturity. Not sure if that answered the question, but I hope some of that.
No, it definitely did. Adam's got his hand up. Is there
There's another, it's a Slido that says, do you know of any ways to sell the benefits of inclusion to people who might not be directly affected by it? I thought that kind of fit in quite well with what we were discussing there. From my own perspective, it is again about this diverse voices, that there is nothing worse than groupthink. And if you've got people surrounding you that think like you do, if you're trying to run a country with people you went to school with, for example, get into groupthink, you make bad decisions. But yeah, I think it is this, and there's a kind of theory of the 10th man, I think they call it in Israel, and the devil's advocate as well. Having a voice in that room whose role it is to disagree is an incredibly powerful tool. So having somebody in that room with a lived experience of something is going to be even more powerful. So that was my take on that one.
Can I just add to that as well, if that's okay? There is I mean, obviously there's lots of research done on homogenous teams, how bad they are, but there's a report by Accenture that shows, I think it's called Reaching Equal or Getting to Equal, and it shows that organizations that actively employ disabled people are more profitable, and on a business level do much better. So there's actually some research now that's been shown to show that. But I mean, just generally, if the world has disabled people in it, 15 to 20% of the population is disabled, and we buy things and we need to use services just like anyone else, unfortunately. So if your workplace doesn't represent society, then you're not going to be hitting the spot when it comes to your products and services. It just doesn't make any sense. So that there's clear business benefits, and just, I mean, and a sort of unofficial benefit. I mean, as a disabled person, I used to cringe, but people in certain workplaces used to say, "Oh, it's really inspiring having you in the workplace." I guess when people would see me potentially, and I used to go, "Oh," but if they see me struggle to do something, it would make them more productive. They would like work harder as well. So it was great for the employer in the end. But I think it's really important, obviously, to normalize disability as well. People can work with someone with a disability in the workplace. It helps to improve that image of disability.
I found you inspiring, Addy.
You don't find me inspiring?
Oh, I do, Addy. Don't ignore him.
But thank you, Adam. And the thing is, I mean, a lot of disabled people do find that cringy when people say, but I can't help if someone's inspired by someone, maybe working a little bit harder to get the same thing done, then that can be a little side benefit. I'd rather not inspire anything. I'd rather be able to get things done with the same effort as anyone else. Someone in a wheelchair, if they have to get out of the chair and drag themselves up 10 steps, and the person at the door says, "Oh, you're so inspiring," they're gonna be a bit annoyed. They're like, "I don't want to be the source of your inspiration. Just put a ramp out there." But as a side benefit, people can get inspired.
Izzy, did you want to come in with something? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, actually maybe we should rephrase the question, and employers should ask, what can we do for you to feel included and to help you succeed in work? Center the person as an equal, not a person in need because of their difference in any way.
That's a really good point. And again, going back to what Addy said about normalising, everyone should be being asked when they're joining an organisation and at regular reviews, have you got everything you need to work comfortably and productively, and then that percentage that I think Addy was referring to earlier, where you've got, one person having to request extra help with different things due to something that could be rectified, and it just doesn't come about.
I think that's a really good point. Just ask everybody, right, okay, this is our standard setup, we give you this system, we have this software, right, tell us, how can we optimize the situation for you? It's not, the disability isn't even coming up, it's just you as a human being, how can we best optimize how can we make you most productive and most comfortable, because that's in the best interest of the candidate and the employer at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And it doesn't even have to be hardware. It could just simply be directions on how to use the existing operating system or the software that's provided as part of the workflow for everyone, but they don't have the expertise or the knowledge of how to do that to best effect.
Okay, so there was another question that's kind of linked to the one about how much an employer can ask. So this one is, when you were newer to advocating for yourself, how did you speak to colleagues or line managers about what you needed? I find it hard to know what I need. So how do you speak to colleagues about what you need? Adam, did you have example there?
I think for me, it was quite difficult to get to a place where I had that level of comfort that I could. And certainly it's only fairly recently that things like mental health have become prominent enough that they're not a taboo and I'm not constantly worried. I think there is, again, this risk of, certainly around mental health, when you talk about something, everything gets attributed to it. So, you know, if I say I'm anxious about something, then suddenly people are saying to me, well, you can't present, you can't do this, you can't do that, I'm going to take everything away from you. So that's that kind of, no, I just wanted you to know I'm feeling a bit anxious today, sort of, I'm having a bad day. But I felt kind of AbilityNet has this kind of much more open attitude. Amy, my line manager, I'm able to say to her, look, I'm having a bit of a bad day, nothing you can do, I'm just feeling like that. I don't want people walking on eggshells, but I just need you to know if I go camera off, you don't have to say what's wrong, it's this sort of, it's just being honest enough with the way I'm feeling in that moment and sharing that with others, but it is difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And the more people do sort of open up and start those discussions, again, that normalizes, doesn't it? But it is within teams as well, there is this whole sort of notion of psychological safety, and sometimes, again, it's really important to stop and have a bit of a roundtable discussion as part of a team meeting to say, how do we want to do this here? Is there a way we feel comfortable about this? Are there things that are stopping people from being sort of, feeling able to be authentic about what they need?
But I have heard of places that do psychological check-ins, and personally, having a round table where they
scary.
do that, I can't think of anything worse. So
we won't implement that. Gizzy, it was.
Sorry, still laughing at that, but I was just going to say that it feels like there's always, so you get diagnosed a bit, and then you get diagnosed a bit more, and then you get diagnosed a bit more, and you spend all of the early part of your life getting to grips with that and learning about it, because you know nothing, and they just tell you that you've got this, or you have this, or this is what's likely to happen, sort of thing, and you have to learn as you go. So you have a huge learning load on you initially on your own. Then when you go to work, you have to educate the people around you as well, and you have to know how you can be helped by those people, which of course you don't, because you're just learning. So actually what you find is there's a long hiatus between initially finding out, okay, I don't hear like other people do, or I can't read like other people do, and when you actually start to get help with how you can best function in work with that disability or difference, whatever you want to call it, it's difficult. And so you really need advocacy. You need an advocate. You need representation from someone who's gone through the same process or has similar experiences that can help you identify, okay, so maybe for that workflow, that thing might actually be really successful for me. It might work really well. And you need the opportunity to try it first, rather than going to the DSA or Access to Work and getting given it and then finding out it's totally inappropriate, because that happens a lot. Because often the decisions are made based on what your disability is identified at, and then they have a list of possible technical options alongside it, and you get given one of those and that solves your problem, and off you go. And of course you go to work and you can't actually use it. It's incredibly wasteful and not appropriate. We need to make it more open for people to learn together. So your colleagues, your manager, your advisor at Access to Work or the DSA, whatever it is, and go through that process together. And that's hard to do. You've got to be able to stand up for yourself and speak up for yourself, which I've always been quite good at, according to my managers, but not everyone is, and that's why it's important to have an advocate. You know, it could be someone else in your workplace, it could be someone from AbilityNet, it could be someone that you've met online in social media. There are lots of communities out there that support each other, share tips about what works for them and what doesn't. Try things. You know, basically you have to just try lots of things and not give up until you find the thing that works for you. You know, and try and get people on board around you to help you with that and go through that process. That's what I wanted to say.
I totally agree with everything you've said there, Gizzy. It's actually helped me to understand some of the challenges I think that I face. Because when you do have a disability, you might not exactly, like the question said, you might not know exactly what you need, but the expectation is, oh, you should know, you know, and if we're going to fork out this much money, or if we're going to try something different for you, this better work. Otherwise, you know, what's your excuse now for not being able to? I think providing that safe space and almost working together to find the best solution, you know, and that takes the pressure off, and also talking to other people. You know, I do that in the blind community. We're very kind of practical. You know, I'll ask someone, you know, how do you work on spreadsheets, or how do you do pivot tables with your screen reader? Can you do that on a spreadsheet? Things like that, and it's really, really important. And seeing if someone else has used a particular solution to get their work done, then you know you can say, oh, that person's done this, so maybe I can try this as well. Because sometimes things like access to work can be challenging as well. You might ask them something, they're like, no, we don't do that. But then if you know someone else who's got it through access to work, or someone's made a case, then you can say, actually, you do, and it's working for this person. So it does take a lot of assertiveness, and you know, it takes effort. You've got your day job, and then on top of that, you've got to, because a lot of people don't need to do this. So I mean, it's not easy, and it is challenging. But one of the best thing is to try, if possible, to talk to other people in the role, and to be transparent with the organization. Say, by the way, I'm not exactly sure myself. When I worked for Accenture, they had never had a blind consultant using a screen reader worked for them before, but their approach was amazing. They said, we put our hands up, we're not sure how to do this, but we can work together. And I said, I've never been a management consultant, I've just been a little student up to this point, so I'm not sure myself, but you know, let's
printed the business card. I don't know what it
exactly let's work on it together. Let's look at the tasks, what they are, let's see where the challenges are, and let's think of solutions to, you know, to optimize the situation. But that can be hard, and it can be taxing, and you know, on your mental health as well. So just take it easy on yourself and understand.
I think that's something that managers need to be very aware of. It takes spoons to deal with disability, access to work, all of that sort of stuff. It takes lots of extra energy for people, and they have to work a lot harder to get to that point. So that needs to be built into their working life. You need to be flexible about it until you can get to a point where we're on an even keel and we can function and not worry about it anymore. And that can take a long time. You have to be prepared to invest in it.
Unbelievably, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. This has absolutely flown by. Adam, I know you've been keeping an eye on the chat. Is there, I think we've probably got time for one question from the chat, but what we will be doing definitely is wrapping up answers to the questions that we haven't got to in the post-webinar send. So don't worry if you've raised a question, the panel will be reviewing it and responding on it. But is there one that stands out, Adam?
There was one that I highlighted just from that last discussion again. It's about workplace passports. So somebody said, we have a workplace passport where all your needs are listed, and it moves with you within the company to alert a new boss, so you don't have to repeat the story. Now, I know this is something that we cover in our gap analysis that we carry out. I think passports are a brilliant idea to a point, but I think, and this is one obviously for Adi and Gizzy to kind of clash with me against or agree, that the problem with a passport is that it does that list of assumptions again, or it means that an employer doesn't necessarily have to think about creating an inclusive environment because the passport becomes the rich. So if you create an inclusive environment, you shouldn't need a passport. Everything should work for you. And that's the ultimate goal, where disability is kind of an oh, by the way. A passport is just the step before it. So great idea, but I'd say not quite there.
Yeah, we have passports at UE, and kind of with Adam here, so it's better than it was before, because if you move internally, you can take your adjusted furniture, for example, which before you couldn't because it was bought by a department, and all of that nonsense that you have when you have an internal market, which causes problems with access. So that kind of element of it is good, and it helps people communicate with new managers about what they need, but also it's kind of fixed. So one of the problems that we're addressing in our Champions Network at the moment is the question about what do we do to support progressive conditions or variable conditions, so conditions that can be flares unpredictably, so or where you have limited spoons, and that will vary from day to day. So spoons as in representation of energy for a day, so the number of activities that you can do. Things like passports and the sort of one size fit all support processes that we have in HR and systems in big organizations don't address these. And that's where it comes down to it's really complex. People are complex and diverse by nature. And so actually giving people control of their information around that and being able to share it. So if the passport was owned by the individual, they tailored it and they updated it according to their status. Maybe that would work a little better.
Yeah.
But the end goal is overall, it shouldn't be necessary. Adjustment shouldn't be necessary, because we should all have end user access in the way that best suits us. That's what we're aiming for, but we're a long way from there at the moment. So for now, where we are at with the passports, maybe we can make them better by making them user owned and user described, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Definitely. Brilliant. Okay. So I just wanted to touch on some upcoming training that we've got that is related to the subject of this webinar. So we have a series of more in-depth lived experience training. We've got a couple of live dates coming up for those. So we've got removing mental health barriers on the 2nd of November and removing physical barriers. Oh, it says 20th of October. Is that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's still in the future. I was thinking I'd put the date in wrong. So yes, so those Adam's leading the mental health barriers one, and we have our colleague Alex is the physical barriers session, and we've got recordings available for you. You had your most recent session last week, didn't you, Gizzy, removing hearing barriers, and Addy on visual barriers, and then we've also got a session around neurodiversity, which was led by our colleague Rena. So recordings are available on the website for those. And we also have some self-service all staff training modules for higher education and workplace settings that zone in on sort of person-centred. A lot of the questions that have been coming up today really around tech that can help, and cultural considerations and so on, language and all of those kinds of things. So do get in touch if you're interested in hearing more about those. If you've enjoyed this webinar and you're not subscribing to our newsletter at this moment in time, please do sign up. It'll keep you up to date with everything that's coming up. We've also got TechShare Pro coming up, our annual digital accessibility conference. Definitely recommend coming along to that. So I don't know if anyone can quickly throw that in the chat, but it's TechShare Pro 2022. Should be able to find a link to that. We've got really good value tickets, but also there's free streaming options for anybody who wants to just dip in and out of the headline sessions. We'd love to see you there. But as I said earlier, we're going to pore over your fantastic questions that you've raised through the session today and respond back on those and circulate a recording in the coming days. So thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.